And then I worked for International Paper Company for 3 years. And in the second year, we had a daughter. And I don't know if any of you know where Bainbridge, Georgia is. It's about 10 miles from the Florida border and about 10 miles from the Alabama border. So as a consequence, she was born in Tallahassee instead. And then we also, I was there for 2 years, then they moved the program to Natchez, Mississippi. We were there for 1 year, and then they made massive cuts. And my program was one of them. So I went back up to Michigan State and did another postdoc, this time with Ken Sink in the horticulture department. And he was doing a lot of work with tomatoes and other species of tomato. And then I got here. And so I've been here for 40 years now. Let's see, I'm going to talk history and a little bit of some of the people that have helped me over the years and past and present. In 1928, growers came to the station at Puyallup. At that time, it was Western Washington Experiment Station. Cuthbert was the main cultivar that was being grown. But it was declining. It was having problems. The growers came to the station and talked to the horticulturists and the head of the hort department and wanted them to fix something. And what they really wanted was something to spray or something like that. It didn't work out that way. Problem was winter hardiness is what they decided. And so they initiated a breeding program to fix that problem. And first they planted some open pollinated seed from 1929. The first crosses were made in 1930. In 1931, the crosses produced Washington and Tahoma, which were pretty good cultivars for that time, and they were released in 1938. The strawberry breeding program started in 1940. Chet Schwartz was doing all of these breeding efforts, and he released Northwest in 1949 and Puget Beauty in 1956. Chet Schwartz was the breeder from 1932 to 1970. So he had a very, very long tenure and had many, many cultivars that he released. And here's a picture of Chet from a while ago. So Chet Schwartz was to 1970, and the Bruce Barrett was there from 70 to 80. And then Tom Chalin was from 80 to 87, and then I've been there since then. Guidance. Having not really a whole lot of berry experience, I needed help. And so Whitey Lawrence was the breeder down in Oregon, and Hugh Dobney was the breeder up in BC when I came. And Whitey Lawrence was wonderful, showing me around in the plots and telling me things. And same thing with Hugh. Both of them were very, very good mentors. And then I'll mention Pete Bristow. He was in the plant pathology department. And he was right next door to me. And so he told me a lot about the diseases on the plants. But also being next door to me, he also kept me advised on what goes on within the university and within the station, which helps. And then Joanne Robbins was the technician when I came. And she had been a technician at Puyallup, and then she had went back and got a PhD and then had come back. And so the interim between when Tom Chalin left and when I started, Joanne ran the program. And so she was very good, again, for helping me. Now, there's so many people over that many years. I'm skipping to the current time. Brad Pugh is one of the people that is in the program, and he basically takes care of the field areas and does some repair of equipment. Susie Smith takes care of stuff in the greenhouse. and also prepare samples that we collect from this in the summer. And then Wendy Huashi Earhart does just about everything else, it seems like. She does strawberries, raspberries, oversees some of the harvests, does statistics, you name it, she does it. So that's very good. And then I'll mention the breeders, Chad Finn and Michael Dossett, and that they are both here. Bob Martin is a virologist, who's very good. Tom Peerbolt with the program he's got going, and then the growers. And I want to mention it particularly, my mind's going. Randy Honku. I particularly want to mention him because he has been so instrumental. Here's a summary of the strawberry program. So far, there's been 13 releases. Of those, Chet Schwartz was a single person on 6 of them, and then it was Bruce Barrett and Chet Schwartz on 3 of them, and then Bruce Barrett and Tom Schlin on 1 of them. And then I was on Puget Reliance, Puget Summer, which we released as Schwartz, but was marketed as Puget Summer, and then Puget Crimson. That I'll mention that Nisqually, Quinault, and Tillicum were all day neutral strawberry cultivars that were developed. Then we'll go on to raspberries. There's been 14 releases up through Cascade Premier, which now has been patented. That was just in October that we got the patent on that one. Again, Chet Schwartz had 6 of them, and then I've been the lead on the rest of the ones since then. And we'll get into more detail later on that. Just mentioned Meeker, of course, that's still the #1 cultivar in the Northwest. It is declining somewhat, but it still is #1. Centennial, make a few comments on Centennial. Let's see here. That when I came, it was 1987, and it was released in 1989. So basically, I was just doing the release of it. I came just before that. Unfortunately, it had a problem with winter hardiness, and it also had some crumbly fruit that they had sent up to BC because they'd done tissue culture on it, and it had some problems. And then also Chilliwack and Comax were released in 1987. And then Tulamine was released in 1989. So it had a lot of competition. So it sort of disappeared pretty quickly. The next one I'll mention is Puget Reliance. The people on that one were me, Carl Shanks, who was the entomologist at Vancouver, Washington, and then Tom Schlin. And Carl Shanks is listed on that one because he put plants in a greenhouse and then released a lot of infected aphids into the greenhouse. And so basically inoculated that small greenhouse with some viruses. And Puget Reliance was one of those seedlings that was in that. And later on, they did a study and they put in plants that were Puget Reliance with the virus and without the virus. Didn't make any difference. It seemed to be completely tolerant to it. So that's a contribution of Carl Shanks. And then I want to mention Randy, that at one of the Small Fruit Center meetings in Oregon, I think it was 2001, Randy and a group of growers got together and said that what I was doing wasn't working very well. And I agree. That I'd select stuff at Puyallup, do all the evaluations, and then try and plant it someplace, and it wouldn't machine harvest very well. So Randy and a few other growers got together and came up with a plan on how we were going to proceed from now on. And so we started out and would propagate up a few plants, put them in 8 or 10 plant plots, and plant them with a grower. Randy was one of the main ones. And we would evaluate them that way. And that has worked. And I want to thank Randy for all that work. And here's a list of the plantings that they've had. Let's see, the Kirk Mayberry Farm did 1 planting, Mayberry Packing did 1 planting, Sakuma Brothers did 4, and Randy did 12. So a lot of them are with Randy, and I really appreciate that. Also, the other growers that did this. And here's some of the pictures from some of the early ones. Some of the lateral lengths, they just got way too long. They got mangled with the harvester or other things that would happen to them. So definitely it wasn't working for that. Some of them just wouldn't come off. If you have a receptacle like that, it's not going to come up over the shoulder very well. And you've got another one here that does that. What really would probably, I assume it did well, is this one where you have a nice taper on the receptacle. So it just would slide off, and you can see this one here is already starting to come off without being harvested at all. And then notches at the top of the collar, that's going to be a problem. And then we had a lot of them that were like this. They just didn't come off until they were overripe. And they'd crumble, collapse, you name it. Everything went wrong with those. Here's a nice crumbly selection. And then there's others that just didn't want to come. Well, actually, they'd come off when they were green with the pedicel attached to the fruit still. So obviously that's not good. So I would evaluate them subjectively for having too many green fruit, overripe fruit, collapsed, or stems in it, or crumbly fruit, and then also for yield in the other fruit characters. And you can see this was done in Sakuma Brothers fields. Cascade Delight. It's a very large one. It's got firm fruit, productive, tart, good levels of root rot tolerance. One of its problems is long fruiting laterals. And if you try and machine it, you may or may not keep the laterals on the plant. But it is a good flavor, good fruit, but long laterals. So you have to watch the nitrogen. That's definitely. Cascade Nectar. Here's another one that's a specialty type. It was released in 1903. Mike Youngquist in Mount Vernon and a winemaker in California got together, and the winemaker wanted to make a raspberry wine. And so the winemaker and Mike both came to Puyallup and walked through the fields, and the winemaker would go through there and taste some of them. He'd take a handful and eat those, and then go to another one and another one. Then he had a few less and a few less, and finally got down to one berry that he'd taste at a time. And then he'd have a berry, and then he'd spit it out. We know better. The plant breeders know better. And finally came up with one that he liked, and they did make some wine from it, from what I understand. Unfortunately, it seemed to be susceptible to root rot. They didn't look for root rot. They were looking strictly for flavor. So you have to get all the combinations in order for things to work well. Let's see, Cascade Bounty. That one's been mentioned several times. It's very, very root rot tolerant. It's also productive. It machine harvests well, but the fruit quality just isn't quite there. But if you look at the picture there of Cascade Bounty and Meeker, you can tell which ones are the Meeker because they're the ones that are dying out. This is 2 years after planting. So this would be the first harvest season. And it was, Cascade Bounty was doing wonderful and Meeker was barely alive. So it is a very tolerant plant. Cascade Gold, that both parents are red fruited. So it is a recessive trait. So if you have to have the homozygous cross, it took 31 years to release. Part of it is just the timing of it, that the cross was made in 1979 when Bruce Barrett was there, and then he left, and then Tom Shalin came and didn't really quite know what to do with a yellow plant like that. And so when I came, somebody asked what I should do with it, and I said, well, put it in a plot. And we did that, and it looked very good. And then it was we sent it down for virus testing, and it tested positive, of course. And they tried to clean it up, and it took a while, and they finally got back a clean plant, and we grew it, and it was red. So we went back and we got some of the actual gold ones of that and repeated things. And because the last one had been the wrong outcome, we put it through all the field evaluations again, and then finally released it. So it took 31 years to do all that. It is my wife's favorite raspberry, though, the favorite flavor. Puget Crimson, that's the next one, released in 2010. It has large fruit, excellent flavor, productive, and it was, let's see, the last plant sales information, it was number 14 on the list of popularity. Let's see, then Cascade Harvest. That was released in 2014, and it's number 5 in the plant sale list, or at least that's what it was in 2018. And it has good yields, attractive fruit, pretty good root rot tolerance if it's low pressure. If it gets too high of root rot pressure, it just collapses. So that one's yeah. Anyway, go on to the next one. Cascade Premier. I recommended it for release in 2017. It was released the next year, I guess. There were a few plants that went out. It's large, firm fruit, harvests easily. It's early season with the midpoint of harvest the same as Willamette. It's more resistant to root rot than Meeker or Cascade Harvest. It's firmer than Cascade Harvest, Meeker, and Willamette. And the soluble solids, pH, and titrable acidity are similar to Willamette, anthocyanins similar to Meeker. And it has excellent flavor. The intent is to release it for machine harvesting and for processing. With those fruit qualities, I'm sure that it would also be good for fresh work. And then I'll mention some promising selections. The first one is 2188. It's a half sib. It shares one parent with Cascade Premier. It's got a similar, very, very similar shaped fruit. It's very firm. It's excellent flavor, good yield, better than Cascade Premier. The fruit characteristics are better. It's a higher anthocyanins, higher sugar, and lower pH. It's late season. It has a midpoint of harvest that's the same as Meeker. So you could have it for the same purpose as you probably would for Meeker. It's fairly root rot tolerant, slightly less than Premier, but right about the same level. That's one that we want to evaluate for machine or for IQF capabilities. And since the market is so, we're willing to wait for a while. And both Cascade Premier and WSU 2188 were selected while they were being machine harvested at the Sakuma Brothers planting. And then we've got a number of selections which we feel are promising, but they still need some testing. Maybe they just need to go out to the grower trials and see how they do for that. But there's a very strong, large pipeline that we've got setting here. 2001 is one that's fairly dark. It seems to have a long season. It's good firmness, very good root rot tolerance. So it could be promising. 2068, when I am highlighting a selection as in green, that means it's got a parent, either it or a parent is very root rot tolerant. So 1499 is quite root rot tolerant. And this one is similar yield and firmness to Wakefield, but it's a bit lighter. 2069, that's a different cross, but same yield and firmness as Wakefield, similar anthocyanins as Wakefield. 2087, 2-year yields were greater than Cascade Harvest and Meeker. Root rot evaluation was very good. 2088, yield was a bit less than Wakefield, firmer than Meeker, less firm than Wakefield. Good fruit quality otherwise. 2130, again, that's got a root rot resistant parent. Good bricks. Yield is fairly good. Root rot resistance is very good. And it tends to have a long season, which may be good or bad. And then there's a whole list of them which still need more evaluations before we even go to the grower trial part. And you see Boyne is a parent of many of the selections that I made that year. And Boyne is extremely tolerant, root rot tolerant. So here's my version of Chad's slide with the WSU cultivars, and I don't have the older Oregon breeders, but I agree. I like this title or comment there, that we've all drunk from wells we did not dig and have been warmed by fires we did not build. That really what we accomplish is highly dependent on who was there before us. So that was very important. And then I'm going to have a couple comments here. One, it's advice that you can ignore, that with the new program, or the next program, we need to have access to machine harvester and evaluate things as they're being machine harvested, and make the selections as they're machine harvested. Both Cascade Premier and 2188 were done that way. And need to have access to areas that have high levels of Phytophthora. Now, I don't know how Mount Vernon is for root rot, but we have wonderful root rot at Puyallup, so we're willing to share. It might be ideal if you could find the right field that would have a combination of Phytophthora and be possible to do the machine harvesting on it. that would be a way to really save time and with that combination. And the person needs to have combination of both traditional breeding and molecular familiarity. And Wendy will be taking over the program after I leave and in the interim, and I'm very confident that she's going to be very successful. I have no doubt on that. And then things change. Here's, when I was going through preparing for this presentation, I ran across this slide in my computer, and in 1960, all the cultivars in the Pacific Northwest were from public programs. And Cuthbert was good for planning, or for canning. I don't know anything that's really canned anymore, is there? Anyway, they had a fruit lab at Puyallup. We still have the building, but we just use it for preparing samples. We're not really doing much evaluation. And then the last one is if machine harvesters can be developed, they may lessen the demand for berries that are very large, like Willamette or Puyallup, which, yeah, it's been a while. And then there's this picture here too of Haim, Chad, and me, and this was down in Chile for one of the Rubus and Ribes symposiums. So with that, any questions? Well, both of them. They just didn't have the right size for him.
Yeah. Well, you can put a barrel liner on him.
And any other comments or questions?
Okay. Does Washington get some samples of cuttings from BC at all? Is there any trade across the border?
There are in some cases, and you know, I go up there most summers and look at the stuff that they have in the field at BC, and also down at Corvallis on a pretty regular basis. So yeah, we interchange stuff. We may not actually move germplasm always between borders and stuff like that, but we do cooperate a great deal. They're very, very good cooperators. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you. Next up, we'd like to introduce Michael Doucette, Ag Food Canada, on the same subjects.
Thank you. So I want to start out just by thanking some folks. There's people at the top there that have contributed either financially or in kind to the program. There's a lot of folks. We get support from growers and industry groups, and there's a lot of folks that have been involved in propagating plants, taking care of plots, collecting data,